Hey, Canada. Let's talk demographics, shall we? I haven't really delved into this subject deep enough, to be honest with you. I've touched on it slightly in certain aspects in some parts of my videos prior, but it's something I think it's really important for people. Like I say, the whole purpose for anyone to actually understand what's going on around them, they need the picture painted that's before them, right? Or the puzzle, the pieces of the puzzle put together, or enough of the puzzles put together that you can start to see the underlying picture that's behind it, right? And when you're talking about, people are always wondering, like, who, this is the problem with when you're talking about central planning and governments and all this stuff is, well, who are my enemies? And I mean, the obvious and easiest thing to point to are those in government. Those are actually the ones that you see are writing the laws, right? Or creating legislation, or the police, or those in the military, or lawyers, or judges. Those people who are part of the system, it's easy to point out, okay, this is the one that's fucking, like, that has messed with my life, or is creating hardships in my life, or stealing from me, or dictating every aspect of my life. That's easy. But we have to understand, how does it come to be that there are people in those positions, right? And who are these people? Is there any kind of generalization as to the type of people? Well, we know, obviously, I mean, based on past studies, that, of course, it's predominantly people that prefer to control and dictate other people's lives. I mean, think about it. Obviously, look at people around you, in your own family, your neighbors, your friends, whatever. The people that work in the private sector, they're obviously people that don't want to have the perceived authority to dictate and control other people or to steal from them and have any sense of legitimacy in doing so. So the people that go into positions of government are already instinctively and inherently the type of people that seek out authority over others. Right? I mean, that only makes sense. So we got that understanding, right? Now the next part is, in the world we live in today, in 2016, and the people that have been in positions of perceived authority, well, who are these people? Well, as we know, demographics definitely plays a role. And when we're talking about demographics can usually be cut down when you're talking about generational demographics, can be usually split up into about roughly, on average, 20-year time frames. So, 18 to 20 years. So as a child, when you're born and raised, on average, 18 to 20 years would be normally considered the difference between each generations, or the time frame distinction between generations. So because you can have a kid, let's say, and then when they grow up, when they're 18 to 20 years old, well, they can have children. I mean, it can happen before that, which is why it's usually a 20-year time frame. So it allows for that discrepancy, that disparity between, obviously not everyone's going to have children at the exact same time, the same year. But generally, as a general rule of thumb, demographics are usually broken down into 20-year time frames. The baby boomers were 46 to 64. Generation X, my generation, so would have been 65 to, was it 84, roughly around there. And then you got the millennials from 85 to 2004, in and around that area. But the whole point, and what I'm trying to get to, what I'm trying to lead up to in this video is, if you look at the people that have been in positions of perceived authority or power, right, that have gone into academia, government, and corporate positions, predominantly you're talking about baby boomers. The ones that have been in the positions of power and influence for the last 20 years, and actually even longer than that, and I'll get to where that comes about, where you see that 20-year time frame being not adhered to properly. And what it comes down to is, demographics are usually based on the 20-year time frame, but in the modern era, that's completely different than historically. The baby boomers were the first generations, when they were younger, and burning the bras and, during the Vietnam War and anti-war. And because they were the cohort that were in such large numbers because their parents, the greatest generations, had to have a lot of kids to propagate the species because they lost a lot of children during wars and conflicts, right? World War I, World War II. But the baby boomers, which was that baby boomer bulge, right? So they were trying to propagate their species, the offspring. But those baby boomers, when they grew up and got older, especially Western, Canadian and American baby boomers, they were fortunate that the world kind of was tossed into their lap almost as far as economic prospects and possibilities because Europe was devastated from World War II. So they had a lot of catching up to do, whereas North Americans, Canadians and Americans, they lost a lot of people, but their infrastructure remained mostly intact because nobody bombed mainland Canada or the U.S. So our infrastructure, our ability to, when Europe was building, who do you think was capable of giving them all the wealth or the capabilities to rebuild? It was North America and U.S. predominantly, with the whole, of course, and I don't want to get into the economics too much about it with the whole, the Bretton Woods Agreement and everything oil being traded in U.S. dollars to help protect some of the Middle Eastern countries. That was the agreement there. But anyways, let me get back to the point that I'm trying to get to. I know I'm going off a little bit there, but the point is there is a great divide in the baby boomers as they got older. There were those that chose, like my parents, my mother and father, that chose to be predominantly traditionalists, right? So you have your kids when you're young, you teach them right from wrong, you raise them to have good work ethic, and you realize that you are going to rely predominantly on them in your future. So there was still a close-knit type of relationship, and your family came first. Now, the other part of that divide were the baby boomers that, because they were starting this whole socialized stuff, and like after the New Deal or in the Canada, the same idea, same kind of prospects about using government, right? Collective mysticism, force, and theft as a means to an end. Well, they realized that it's much more beneficial to them to go into career mode, and especially women after the whole first wave feminism movement, right? But they were, and getting the vote and all that stuff, well, they now could step out into the workforce. So instead of being a traditional mother where you have your kids and raise them and be the nurturer, which are all great things, they're just like in the animal kingdom, actually a necessity to propagate the species. But instead, a lot of them rejected that and went into career mode, where money and finances and economic prosperity dominated the narrative, not necessarily traditional family values or having kids and just going to work to provide, right? So the cohort of boomers that went into to be professional type people and to go into professional careers, academia, corporations, or government, they put off having their children until a much later stage in their life. And that was almost to a T that 18 to 20 year disparity between their private sector counterparts. Is they chose to have their kids much later life. And I know this to be true in my own life, in both my mother and father's side of the family, and even in my stepfather's family. You could see that great divide even in that example. So that's a personal subjective experience, but a lot of people out there, and I imagine those who watch this video, will know that to be true in their own lives. So the ones that choose to make professional careers and go into academia, they put off having their children till much later in their life. So you ended up with a lot of people, like boomers. I know a lot of them. There's boomers that have kids because my boomer parents had their kids much younger in the normal traditional aspect, and then I had my kids in the same traditional when me and my wife were both younger. I have kids right now, 21 and 25, that are in and around the same age, or maybe just a tad bit older, but in and around the same age range as the boomers that chose to go into professional careers that had their kids when they were into their, mid to late 30s or even early 40s. So when me and my wife had our kids when we were in our teens, the ones that had their children in their 30s raised kids that were roughly in the same, like they're both what would be considered millennials. So I have what would be considered millennial age children, but I am considered Generation X. But what you don't ever hear about, and why that our generation is never really spoken to or spoken about much, like whether it's in academia, public education, or in the mainstream media, are think about who those people that are in those positions. Those are the people that chose professional careers over having a family. So to them, their children, there's no Generation X for them, for the most part, doesn't even exist predominantly, because their kids are millennials. So they don't even seem to have the ability or want to recognize the fact that there's a whole cohort, there's a whole generation that they barely even know to exist. But I mean, in our family, even in our family divide, my mother and father predominantly hung out with people that were, once again, blue collar, just going to a job to pay to raise your family kind of people. And then the professionals, the ones that chose academia, they hung out with their own type of people. So like I said, they don't have any real world personal experiences much. So there's a reason why they don't even really pay any attention or understand that there's a whole age demographic called Generation X. So they don't care about us. Like, we're like this forgotten. There's millions of us in Canada. I think, what was the last time I checked statistically? We make up to like 20% of the population in Canada. But it's like, so that would be into the millions. But it's like we don't even exist. And if you listen to anyone or any of the news reports, articles, or on the mainstream media television shows, or late night news or documentaries, you barely ever hear even a whisper of the word Generation X. It's all baby boomers and millennials. And that's because the people, like I said, that chose to go into professional careers, chose to put the profession as the forefront, and their children, or having a family, on the back burner. Their children are millennials. So to them, the next generation alive are millennials. And I mean, look at the difference between, just look out in the workforce too. Look at the, look at the millennials and their work ethic, their habits, their behaviors, and then look at the children that were born, like, first of all, me, like Generation X, or how us Generation Xers raised our kids. You'll see the discrepancy there is my kids have a much stronger work ethic because, like I said, they were raised with mostly traditional values, whereas the millennials that were born and raised by baby boomers, well, look at the disparity. Look at what they are like. Sure, they might have a lot more academic intelligence, but street smarts, cunningness, the ability to be objective in their reasoning, in their logic, it's massively lacking. And why? Because they weren't allowed. When you're younger parents and you're raising kids, you don't have that authoritarian mindset because you're still learning yourself. So you're learning as your children are learning, and you both are growing together. So it's kind of a live, let live mentality. Whereas baby boomers that chose to go into professional careers, they raised their kids like, hey, I know it all. Look at me. I'm in position to. They've been taught to think that they're so much smarter and wiser than everyone else that they think that they use the more authoritarian approach, or if it's not necessarily authoritarian, it's still another twist of that authoritarianism, but coddling your kids is like overprotective because, oh, look, I know so much better, trust me, right? So that is the great divide when you're talking about, when you look out in the real world and all around you. The great divide is the boomers that only recognize millennials as the next generation that they need to even concern themselves with, And they completely ignore Generation X, even though, like I said, we're a substantial portion of the population. But if you look at those out, whether it's, I'm not going to drop names, but look at the people that are the leaders of liberty, that have the loudest voices, that are speaking out about this kind of stuff that's happening all around us. You'll see it's predominantly from people in my age cohort, the Gen Xers. We are the true leaders of liberty because we're the last remnants, the last generation that has that semblance of objective understanding and strength, individual characteristics, and courage. Not saying, like I say, there's exceptions to the rule in every generalized statement that I make. There's always exceptions to the rule. But if you look out at the disparity and the divide, you will see the boomers that chose careers over children, and then the boomers that chose to place family first. You don't want the ones that are in positions of power now, the ones with all the diplomas lying in their walls, aren't really the ones that are truly intelligent. I recognize them. I mean, there are certain aspects that I guess you could say are intelligent, but they're like, to me, they're like well-trained seals or dolphins at Marineland. They had certain things that were hammered into their head, so they've learned to repeat and regurgitate those things without even questioning. Whereas people, the live and let live, or the blue-collar type people like myself, Gen Xers, and how we chose to raise our kids, we still, because of our live and let live mentality, our intelligence, our willingness, and our ability to think outside the box is much more prevalent. And these are the kind of people that you really need around if you want to better understand things, the world around you. These are the people you need to talk to. And I think I might do another whole video as a further update in this, because this is something, like I said, I don't think I've even really delved into this before in past videos, but I think it's very important so that people understand and recognize and realize that you really need to start looking to the Generation Xers, because we really are the ones that are leading the fight for liberty, for true prosperity, for ending this system of oppression and theft, this religion of statism where it teaches people to use forced collectivism, forced subjugation, the new form of slavery, right, as a means to an end. The live and let live model has always proved and always will prove to be the best way to bring about liberty, obviously. It's Canadian Libertarian. I love liberty.